Okay, so here's our model of the gross anatomy of the spinal cord. This is really a fantastic model. I remember I did a happy dance when we bought this model because I was so excited. Okay, so let's just kind of check our bearings so we can see what we know already. So here are our cervical vertebrae, okay, and our thoracic and lumbar vertebrae. And then we have the sacrum and the coccyx. Okay, so all of this that we're seeing in here is inside the vertebral cavity. Okay, so we have a combination of central nervous system tissue, which is the solid white material, and then we also have various nerve-like structures. Okay, some are kind of alone and others are in collections. Okay, a couple of other things that you can see here, just looking superiorly. Here's part of the brain, more of the brain here, a little more here. So basically right here is the border between the brain and the spinal cord, and you can see they're continuous with each other. There's no real landmark on the central nervous system tissue to say easily you've reached the end of the brain and started in through the spinal cord, but we can tell that we've gotten to the spinal cord because here's C1. So once you see the first cervical vertebra, you know you must be in the spinal cord. Okay, and everything from there on is, until we get to here, is spinal cord. Okay, so this is the inferior tip of the spinal cord, the conus medullaris, and that's its inferior limit. The superior limit, you could either say it's the foramen magnum, which is a good landmark to consider, or C1, either one, because they're basically at the same location. Okay, so as we're starting from the foramen magnum and working inferiorly, you can see that the cord is kind of skinny and all of a sudden it flares out. Where it flares out, that is the cervical enlargement. Okay, and then if we go inferiorly again, you can see it gets skinny again. And that's in the thoracic section of the cord. And then it gets wider again. And where it gets wider, that is the lumbar enlargement. Okay, now it makes sense of why we have these enlargements if you think about what's in the spinal cord. Okay, remember that we have collections of white matter and gray matter. Okay, and as we look at this section of the spinal cord where the cervical enlargement is, we can see that there are lots of big, thick, white structures which are eventually going to become nerves out here in the periphery that are attached to that cervical enlargement. Okay, and if we look at the lumbar enlargement, all of these white structures here are coming from that lumbar enlargement, and they eventually become lots of nerves going out into the periphery as well. Okay, so remember that nerves are collections of axons. Okay, and if you have axons, somewhere you have to have cell bodies and dendrites, because those are the three parts of a neuron. Okay, so if all of these axons are coming from this section of the spinal cord, then there must be cell bodies and dendrites in this section of the cord as well. And the same thing for here. Okay, lots of axons here, lots of cell bodies and dendrites here in the cord. So the more cell bodies and dendrites you have in the cord, the larger that section of the cord is. Okay, so that's why we have a thin cervical section and then a cervical enlargement, a thin thoracic section, and then a lumbar enlargement. If we had two sets of arms, guess what? We'd have another enlargement, because we'd have to have lots of neurons with lots of axons supporting all of the muscles and structures that are in that extra set of limbs. Okay, and hey, who knows, maybe we'll evolve that someday. Okay, all right, now let's go inferiorly. We saw the conus medullaris previously, the inferior tip of the spinal cord. Here, from here on, there's no spinal cord, but there is a large collection of nerve roots associated with the spinal cord. This collection of nerve roots collectively is called the cauda equina. Okay, and it's called the cauda equina because if you dissected out the whole spinal cord with these roots attached and put it in a bucket, those roots would fan out and look like a horse's tail. Okay, the pink line, which didn't used to be pink, I'm going to say, someone at some point in the past took it upon themselves to draw on it with a highlighter, which I have to say I'm not very happy about. Please don't draw on the models. It's disrespectful. These things are so expensive, you wouldn't even believe it. Okay, and we've actually tried to get this highlighter off and we can't. It's like permanently defaced now. So this pink line that you see here is the filum terminale. Okay, now basically what this is pia mater. Okay, remember that there's 3 layers of meninges associated with the spinal cord. Okay, we have the dura mater, that's the most exterior, the arachnoid mater, or just plain arachnoid, which is the next layer, and then we have the pia mater. Okay, now the pia mater is what is right up against the surface of the spinal cord and the brain. When you get to the conus medullaris, all of the pia mater, it's kind of like it was a sleeve around the spinal cord and it just collapses on itself and it becomes a string-like structure. And that filum terminale eventually attaches to the coccygeal ligament and becomes part of its structure. So that gives you an attachment from the conus medullaris to the coccyx, and that helps to hold the spinal cord in place. Okay, so it doesn't start shifting superiorly as we're doing all of our different movements. Okay. You can also see on this model where the dura and arachnoid end. That's typically around S2. And that's where your cerebrospinal fluid ends. There's no cerebrospinal fluid down in this section. These nerve roots are not surrounded the way they are up here. Okay, so in this section you have cerebrospinal fluid, and this is why they go in for lumbar puncture into this area. There's no spinal cord there, but there is cerebrospinal fluid. You can move around the nerve roots a lot easier than you can move around the spinal cord. Okay, if you look closely in here, something you may have talked about in lecture, you can also see the denticulate ligaments. Okay, those are these little structures that kind of look like a circus tent, the top of a circus tent. So here would be the bottom over here attached to the cord, and then the tip is attached to the dura and arachnoid over here next to each of the ribs and vertebrae. Okay, and so those are helping your spinal cord to stay in the middle of the vertebral foramen and not move from side to side, or medial lateral displacement, that would be called. Okay, all right, so those are our main structures in the gross anatomy. We'll be taking a look at the cross-sectional anatomy shortly.